This lecture is part 2 of understanding physical development in 2 and 3-year-olds. So our key concepts are, we're going to be talking about 2-year-olds have improved motor control and expressive language skills, and that patience is the key to working with 2-year-olds as they tend to be very negative. They become very frustrated, and they have lots of temper tantrums if you've ever been around them. That's why they're called the terrible twos. And then also our 3-year-olds, they have better coordination, they have a slightly more mature thinking skills, and are typically eager to please, but they continue to have temper tantrums if they are not controlled or talked to in the appropriate manner. So we're going to be able, after we're done, to describe the physical, cognitive, and social emotional development of 2-year-olds, relate how the development of those 2 and 3-year-olds will affect your role as a teacher. So let's begin talking about the physical development of 2-year-olds. First of all, I want to begin to explain to you from a theory standpoint that the two-year-olds are at the peak of the sensory motor part of who Piaget, the theorist, tells us. And remember, I talked about the development from birth to 2, that the growth pattern comes from the core and they grow outward. Well, and that there's also a rapid growth in infancy. Well, it begins to taper off when they're 2. Their sensory perceptions and everything about them is at the peak in their cognitive growth. So you will see characteristics in 2-year-olds. Their physical development includes gross motor development, it includes fine motor development, and it includes self-help skills. But because they're at such of a peak in their sensory motor, they are still very sensory oriented. And so their emotions take a lot of development at this particular point. Now, I will also tell you that cognitively, they are at a peak too, and a lot of times they cannot speak what they really know because they don't have the language development in their mouth to be able to communicate that in their speech, but they have it in their head. So you see the frustration that happens when they can't say what they know, or they can't do what they know to do because maybe their bodies won't cooperate with them. So they get very frustrated, especially when they cannot communicate. And that's when you see the tantrums, because that's the only thing they know to do to cause a tension to happen. So let's look at their gross motor. Where are they at? Well, of course, they do have some improved coordination and body control. Like playing with balls, they can kick, but sometimes they can't actually hit the ball because they have a bit more control in their legs and their foot muscles, but they're just starting to develop. So you have to give them some slack when it comes to balancing and jumping and even riding or kicking a ball, because those foot muscles, they may know where their foot's supposed to hit, but a lot of times it won't hit because their eye-hand coordination hasn't come into line yet. Their fine motor skills, which are their small muscles, their finger dexterity and control, is what we're talking about. They begin to use writing utensils at this age, but we can't expect a lot of them because they're usually in stage 1. So you're going to see a lot of, when they grab hold of a pencil, they're going to grab it with their hand like this, and they're going to spin it around on the paper. This is also a time where their hand preference is developed. So they will either be right-handed or left-handed, and they will begin to use the dominant hand more at this particular age. And these fine motor skills are developed through building with blocks, through puzzles, through pegboards, any type of pinching skills, those types of things. We need to begin to work with them on their fine motor development as they grow and mature toward their 3-year-old program. Their 2-year-olds in self-help skills, they can undress themselves, but they are at the very beginning stages of dressing themselves. They can drink from a cup without help. A lot of times, if they cannot drink from a cup, if you will give them a straw, you will see a huge improvement. They will begin to drink with straws, and they start to eat with a spoon. And then the cool part about them is they begin their toilet training at 2, or a little bit below that, like at 18 months. But I wouldn't push it any lower than that. 2-year-olds take a special person to work with them because they're just so different. So they have what's called expressive language, which is the ability to produce language forms. Speech involving simple sentences. So you will hear 2-year-olds begin to put words together to make a simple sentence with a subject and a verb usually, and a couple of adjectives added on, but it doesn't get any more complicated than that. 2-year-old language strategies work best. There's 2 language strategies that work best with 2-year-olds, and they're called feeding in, which you provide the child's language, and expansion, you expand the child's language. In their math skills, as you're letting them build and sort different things, colors in your classroom, size concepts, big and small, are things that 2-year-olds need to be working on. The awareness of shapes, forms, and colors. Sorting objects based on what a child has been given is another way to actually get a hold of this and have 2-year-olds progress in their math skills. In their social emotional development, that's the most important for the 2-year-olds, and they play next to each other but not cooperatively. They're more interested in adults. They can be possessive over their things and adults, and sharing is very difficult for them because they are so sensory oriented. And they are usually very, very affectionate. In their emotional development, they like to control their surroundings, and they can get frustrated very easily. When they are afraid of being harmed, they become very imaginary. Like, they'll say they saw something. So you have to trust what they say, but not always agree with it. They are loving, they are caring, they do need security, and they do need a routine. So why do you think patience is an important quality when you work with 2-year-olds? Take a minute and just think about that. Well, when I think about 2-year-olds, I think about their emotional behavior,